Hi everybody, we're going to talk about refrigerant tanks today. So these are our refrigerant recovery tanks. So when you take the refrigerant out of a unit to work on it or to dispose of the unit, you take it out of the machine and you save it in these recovery tanks. Okay? There's a couple features with all recovery tanks. As you can see, you've got two valves with two 1/4-inch flare connections for hooking up your gauges and your hoses to these tanks. One of them is for the gas and the other one is for the liquid. So in a refrigerant cylinder, we have a mix of liquid and gas. And so the liquid is going to be on the bottom. Just from gravity, the weight of the liquid is going to go to the bottom of the tank. So with our second valve for the liquid, I just broke this off, there is a dip tube. So that tube connects the top of the tank, the valve on top, to the bottom of the tank in order to suck the refrigerant, to access the liquid refrigerant without having to turn the tank upside down. This tank also has a feature. Some of the older recovery machines, there's an electric connection here that would plug into your refrigerant recovery machine. So these bottles, you can only fill them up 80% because you need to leave room for expansion when the tank gets hotter. So these old style had a float switch that as the liquid refrigerant would fill up the tank, it would push up this float and turn the recovery machine off. And so that was a feature of the older style. I think basically they just want you to sit there and watch it from now on because they don't really have that feature on a lot of the refrigerant cylinders anymore. One thing I want to caution you on, don't go by the colors. So if you look here on this tank, it can change from tank to tank. The red one is gas and my blue is liquid. Over here, my red one's the liquid and the blue one, it says vapor or gas. So never go by the color of the handle. Always read the handle because you can see they look almost exactly the same and one's accessing the top of the bottle, the other's accessing the bottom of the bottle. Okay, there's a few things you need to know about. Most of the information on the tanks are stamped onto the handle, and you're going to need some of this information. So like right here, one of the key information you need is the serial number. So as you recover the refrigerant, say this refrigerant cylinder, say I was working on a unit that had 100 pounds of refrigerant in it, I would need 3 of these bottles. So you need to distinguish how much refrigerant you put in what cylinder and by the serial number. And what I like to do is just take a picture of all my serial numbers first, or as I use them, and that way I have that information and I don't forget, because a lot of times you'll take the refrigerant out and put it back in and then bring the bottle back, and by the time you turn the bottle in and you didn't do your paperwork yet, then you don't have those serial numbers. So it's always a good idea I just take a picture of them all and then I have them in my phone and then I delete them afterwards. So on the other side of this, we have our WC, which is 47.6. WC is water capacity. So if this tank was full of water, that's how many pounds it would hold. So this is basically what we call a 50-pound cylinder, even though it's a little less. And so, as I said, you're only allowed to fill these up to 80%. So 80% times a 50-pound cylinder would equal 40. So I would, you can only get 40 pounds of refrigerant in each one of these cylinders. And so that same scenario with 100 pounds of refrigerant, I would need 3 50-pound bottles because you can only fit 80 pounds into the 2. And so I would need a third cylinder for that extra 20 pounds of refrigerant. Okay. The TW, which stands for tare weight or tank weight, is 28 pounds. And that's what the cylinder weighs when it's empty. I like to weigh my cylinders before I use them. And when you're, one of the things to take into consideration when you're doing that is if you have your hoses already hooked up to the cylinder or not, because it can change the weight depending on the way the gauges are and the hoses are hanging on the hose on the tank. It can add weight to it and throw you off. You see this 792. So this cylinder was made in July of 1992. This is actually the first cylinder I ever bought. And when we first started having to recover refrigerant back in 92 is when they started it. And these tanks are supposed to be retested, pressure tested every 5 years. And so, yeah, I'm a little out of date on that one. And that's the reason I cut this one up. So I had a little demonstration. Cylinders are gray on bottom, yellow on top. I believe that is one of the recovery questions and when we do the recovery exam. So this is a newer bottle. And like I said, all the cylinders actually also have a pressure relief, which is this part here. And let's see if we can see where that red thing is. And it'll blow that red plastic thing out if the pressure relief opens up. This is one, the older style. And so that's just a couple different ones, but all pressure vessels have a pressure relief in them. We've got that fitting where I had the float switch installed on this one. So it was optional to add a float to that. The information is different on this one versus this tank. So it's manufacturer. They stamp it different ways. So my tank weight on this one, or my capacity, is 47.7 on this one. And my tare weight is 31.6. And that's one of the things you don't want to just guess on the bottle weight, because this one's 31 and this one's 28. So depending on who made the bottle, each one weighs a little bit different, like with the weight of the weld, where they welded it together, or the different styles of the handles can change that weight. So you always want to make sure you don't just say, oh, it's 27, and guess that way. And sometimes the serial numbers are a little bit harder to find. I believe this number here is the serial number on that one, where it was on the side of this tank over here. So now these are new refrigerant tanks with new refrigerant in them only. And as you can see, they're a lot thinner than the recovery tanks. So you're not allowed to reuse these. Okay. This is an R22 cylinder. These are color coded. Different refrigerants have a different color of the tank. So you said the 22 is green. And one of the things you notice here is we only have one valve here. So with the T handle for the handle. And then up here is a rupture disc. So that that plug there will blow out if you overpressurize this one. And so, and then it's done if you do that. You can also see the handles are a lot thinner. And as I said, you cannot reuse these. So inside of this handle is a check valve, so you cannot refill these anymore. The really old ones back when I first started, you could pressurize these back up. You can put stuff back in them, and they've added a check valve where you cannot do that anymore. As I said, this is R22, and this one is 410A. And as again, the refrigerant is on the bottom half of this, and the gas is on the top. So some refrigerants, like our 410A, you need to charge them as a liquid. So in order to do that, you'll see there's a couple arrows here. And it says this end up for use. So what you actually do is turn the bottle upside down. So now this ends up for use. That my valve is on the bottom of the tank where the liquid is. And so we can access the liquid refrigerant from there in this position. So, as I said, these are not reusable. But when you're filling up a machine, you cannot get this empty. So we, because there can be like up to a pound of refrigerant left over in these cylinders, and you just can't get it out by using the air conditioner to draw it in due to the pressure of the suction side. So you would want to recover the leftover gas in these cylinders and put it in one of these and mark it as new refrigerant. And so if you're using up a lot of the jugs, a pound here, a pound there adds up, and you can fill up one of those 20, if you get a pound out of each one, you get 20 bottles, you'll get 20 pounds of refrigerant, brand new refrigerant that you didn't have. One of the other things with these bottles is, and this is a recent development, when they came out with 410A. These were always a 30-pound cylinder. R22 is a 30 pounds of refrigerant. Okay? Due to the higher pressures of 410A, they only put 25 pounds in the same size cylinder. I don't know, see where the weight is. I'll see if they marked it. So anyway, this is 25 pounds in the pink ones versus 30 in the like the R22. So to dispose of these, since you can't reuse them, you've got to throw them away. So you take all the refrigerant out, you recover it, put it in a recovery tank, and then you can open up the valve. Remember there's a T handle here? You open that up once all the refrigerant's out, and then you can snap it off, snap the handle off with a pair of channel locks and to disable the valve. And then in addition to that, I always like to poke a hole in my rupture disc. It's a little thinner metal. And that way, there's no chance that it can be reused and everybody can see that that tank has been compromised. Then you just dispose of it as scrap metal. All right, so that about concludes our tutorial on refrigerant bottles.